The Honourable Jeremy Buckingham.
Thank you so very much, Mr President. Mr President, I move, according to notice, that leave be given to bring in a bill for an act to amend the Drug Misuse and Trafficking Act 1985 to make it lawful for an adult to possess small quantities of cannabis for personal use, to make it lawful for an adult to cultivate not more than 6 cannabis plants for personal use, to permit an adult lawfully in possession of cannabis to give the cannabis by way of a gift to another adult and for related purposes.
The question is that the motion of the Honourable Jeremy Buckingham be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Mr President, I present the bill and move that this bill be now read a first time and published.
The question is that this bill be now read a first time and published. All those of that opinion please say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Drug Misuse and Trafficking Amendment, Regulation of Personal Adult Use of Cannabis Bill 2023, first reading.
Mr President, I move that this bill be now read a second time. Mr President, it is my enormous honour to be here in this august chamber to be introducing the Drug Misuse and Trafficking Amendment Regulation of Personal Adult Use of Cannabis Bill 2023. This is the culmination of a lifetime of activism by reasonable Australians looking for responsible drug law reform when it comes to cannabis. This is the first time that a bill has been developed, introduced and debated in this chamber to legalise cannabis, and it shows the benefit of having small parties in this chamber, in this parliament, pushing particular issues because we have a focus on getting things done. We only have to look at the progressive reforms we saw around marriage equality and voluntary assisted dying to see the value of small parties bringing particular issues to a chamber and pushing for progressive reform. And the time has come for us to be bold. To paraphrase a few poets and philosophers, Bertrand Russell said that the stupid are cocksure and the intelligent are timid. And in that vein, the other great philosopher poet that I often refer to, Bob Marley, said, "Get up, stand up for your rights." And that is what the Legalise Cannabis Party is doing right now. We are standing up for the rights of millions of Australians to reasonably and responsibly grow and use cannabis for their own enjoyment and for medicinal purposes. The purpose of the bill is to allow the cultivation, possession, use and gifting of cannabis by adults at private residences and for other purposes. The changes laid out in this bill are both modest and unthreatening. In essence, the bill enables an adult to cultivate not more than 6 cannabis plants for personal use and to allow them to share the harvest with friends. Payment for cannabis would remain illegal. That is a key aspect of our bill. We are not looking at going to a commercial model. This is about people giving the government, giving people the freedom to grow their own cannabis, use it responsibly as adults, share it with friends, but avoid a rush into a commercial model as other jurisdictions are doing. The bill restricts personal possession to 50 grams of dry cannabis and also restricts the gifting of dry cannabis to 50 grams. Carers under our bill would be allowed to cultivate cannabis on behalf of those they are caring for, either at the carer's residence or at the patient's home. This provision will enable people who are too unwell or disabled to access cannabis legally. For the 2/3 of Australians who have never used cannabis, there will be very little, if any, detectable change. All it does is legalise what is already happening out in our society. But for the 37% who have used cannabis at least once, and especially for the 200,000 people in New South Wales who use medicinal cannabis to treat their condition. This will be a powerful force for good. We know that cannabis prohibition is a failed policy and that it has its roots in the racist attitudes of the United States in the 1930s. After alcohol prohibition was lifted, those who had supported teetotaling began to target cannabis or marijuana, which was and remains widely consumed in African American, Asian and Mexican communities in the US. It was a deliberate and cynical use of cannabis prohibition laws to target minorities and sow division. And as I will soon describe, the innate racism of this law continues today in Australia. Australia banned the import and export of cannabis in 1926, but it was not until 1967 that the Narcotic Drugs Act outlawed cannabis throughout the Commonwealth. The benefits of a careful and responsible relaxation on the responsible adult use of cannabis are profound and important. The first will be a drastic reduction in cost to law enforcement and to the justice system. Since 2010-2011, there have been 702,866 cannabis-related arrests in Australia, more than 90% of which were for personal use or possession. 700,000. In 2019-2020, nearly half of all drug-related arrests were for cannabis. Whilst we invest taxpayer dollars on a prohibition model, more than $1.7 billion is being spent on cannabis-related law enforcement, and that was the figure from 2015-16. This bill is about taking profits away from criminals. It will make a significant dent in the massive profits made by organised crime as a result of cannabis prohibition. Using data supplied by the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, ASIC, in their National Wastewater Drug Monitoring Program, the annual value of the illicit cannabis market in New South Wales has been put in the range of $4.5 billion. That's money which is flowing directly into the hands of organised crime and then used to fund all manner of appalling criminal enterprises. This bill is also about social justice. It should perhaps come as no surprise that, as with the levels of incarceration and interactions with police, First Nations people are heavily overrepresented in the enforcement of unjust cannabis laws. The Minister for Police tells me in the 3 years between 2020 and 2022, there were 19,000 involvements between First Nations people and police for cannabis, an average of 6,410 involvements per year. And Mr. President, that overrepresentation in terms of numbers is that 35% of cannabis interactions with police involve First Nations peoples, and yet they only make up 3.5% of the population. That shows that cannabis laws are being used to target First Nations people, and so often a prosecution for cannabis is the first step a First Nations person takes into the criminal justice system and has an enormously deleterious impact on their life. Our party wants to deal with this issue rationally, reasonably and based on evidence and through a health lens. Let's move to the area of health. This bill will also address the inequity in health provision, where low-income patients who are suffering from neurological pain, epilepsy, PTSD, anxiety and a wide range of further conditions cannot afford the hundreds of dollars needed for medicinal cannabis prescription. Many of them, the majority of them, women. This is about equity. It is also about compassion. I have talked to people who who have called me threatening suicide because they can bear their pain no longer and because they simply cannot afford the only treatment that works for them, that is literally saving their lives. It's cold comfort for them to hear that they need to wait until we persuade this Parliament to act. While my strong preference would be for medicinal cannabis to be added to the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, the ability for pensioners and others to grow their own plants would be a giant step in the right direction. So why is now the right time to relax the prohibition on the responsible adult use of cannabis? In part, this is simply because the time has come. The 2020 National Drug Strategy Household Survey found that 3/4 of the population think possession of cannabis should not be a criminal offence. A survey published by Essential Research in August found that 51% of respondents in New South Wales agreed. The majority of people, Mr. President, in New South Wales do not believe that cannabis should be illegal. What's to be afraid of? Here it is, Mr. President, a bit of cannabis. Medicinal cannabis, my medicinal cannabis. There it is. Don't be afraid. This is a herb, it is a medicine, it is a recreation, and it should be legal in this country. So many jurisdictions in this country, Mr. President, have moved to legalise cannabis. It's good for you, it'll be good for the economy, and it'll save taxpayers' dollars. Now, I note, Mr. President, that if I gave this cannabis here to you, that you would suffer a penalty of $10,000 and 10 years jail. So would I. 10 years jail, $10,000. If this was not my medicinal cannabis, I would lose my place in Parliament and could go to jail for 10 years. So, thank you very much for not calling me to order, allowing that prop. I did get advice about tabling the cannabis, but I wouldn't like to see the clerk arrested and sent to long bail for my bud.
You're doing well so far, Mr. Buckingham.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. I'll come and see you later. Anyway, perhaps a better question. Perhaps a better question is, why was cannabis ever made illegal in the first place? Critics of this bill will point to a number of areas of concern. They will talk about the risk to children. They will talk about concerns that will increase the road toll. They will talk about fears of increased drug use. They will talk about mental health concerns. They are all perfectly reasonable concerns and issues that I will deal with in greater detail in my reply if necessary. I would briefly address these concerns in this way. Our bill creates a regulated and safe cannabis framework that takes the drug trade off the streets. All aspects of this bill will restrict cultivation, possession and use to adults. Appropriate protections for children will be maintained by retaining all existing penalties for supply of cannabis to children or possession of cannabis by children. Concerns about the road toll are not justified by the evidence. While most recent and authoritative meta-analysis do suggest a slight increase in risk from cannabis-positive drivers, it is important to note that evidence is mixed. Overall, research from the Lambert Initiative at the University of Sydney have concluded that the overall increase in risk is considerably less than seen with other prescription drugs for which driving is legal in patients. Research conducted by Thomas Arkell at Swinburne University of Technology in Victoria concludes that, and I quote, "The effects of THC on driving are generally modest and appear similar to the effects of very low dose alcohol." It should also be noted that studies which show increases in road accidents following legalisation are studying jurisdictions where the commercial sale of cannabis has been legalised. We are not advocating that. This also addresses the fear of increased use of cannabis as well as other drugs. Leaving aside the questionable hypothesis that cannabis is a gateway drug, the only mechanism by which this may be plausible is to force users to source their cannabis from the black market. Our bill regulates cannabis, enables people to talk about their cannabis use, to develop a model for what responsible use is, and to get help to talk to health professionals in the knowledge that they will not be criminalised and face 10 years jail simply for possessing cannabis, 10 years jail for simply cultivating cannabis. And we have to look at the ACT. That has what our model is in part in place there. Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drug Association ACT Chief Devon Bowles was quoted as saying that no news is good news in the ACT. He said, overall, we found cannabis use hasn't changed, and in some ways that's the big story, because there were really dire predictions at the outset. People who want to use cannabis in this state and in this country do use cannabis. They do so at risk of outdated and outrageous criminal sanction, but we need to remove that. He said further, the sky hasn't fallen and people who need to access treatment are better able to do so while the taxpayer is saving money. It's a win-win. Not surprisingly, ACT Health reported no increase in hospital presentations in the 12 months following the change law, because no one dies from cannabis. When we look at the drug epidemic in the opiate drug epidemic in this state, it is and in this country, it is killing more people than the road toll. Opiates, legal drugs are killing more people. Accidental overdoses, no one ever overdosing or dying from cannabis. So for so many people, it is a reasonable, effective alternative to opiates, a drug that can make them sick, can affect their mental health and can kill them. The final concern often quoted around cannabis concerns is mental health. The first point that I would make again is that our proposal is simply about growing plants for personal use. It's not about commercialisation. It's not about shop fronts. It's not about marketing cannabis to anybody. It's simply about freedom of choice. It's simply about growing your own supply and sharing it with friends responsibly, adults. Research by Dr. Peter Gates of the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre at the University of New South Wales shows that two factors are critical to any mental health harm involving cannabis use before the age of 18. Dr. Gates found that, I quote, the proportions of individuals with psychosis among the population and among cannabis users are low. He quotes research that has found that the rates of incidence are low, about 14 in 1,000 cannabis users, and by far the greatest risk factor are early and frequent use. Yet again, this underlines the imperatives addressed in this bill, both of protecting children and of opening up and health and educational interventions with at-risk consumers. These possibilities are dramatically curtailed while we continue to the prohibition model. So this bill is not a risky bill. It proposes similar measures to those already operating smoothly in the ACT and is a long distance from full legalisation or commercialisation. Quite the reverse. This is a bill that protects and supports medical cannabis patients, that attacks the economic model of gangsters and criminals, that will have no discernible effect on those who choose not to consume cannabis. It's a bill that will save New South Wales on the significant costs of law enforcement. It was a bill that will take a significant part of our population outside of criminal activity. More than that, this is a bill whose time has come. Jurisdictions all over the world recognising the war on drugs has failed. There is a massive opportunity for us to reduce harm and end prohibition. It is now a decade since Uruguay became the first country to legalise cannabis. And just recently, Mr. President, the bellwether Midwest state, Bible Belt state of Ohio voted 60-40, essentially, to legalise adult use of cannabis. That's how they framed it. And that state, a Republican state, a state that votes for Donald Trump, voted to legalise cannabis. And they joined other Democrat states, New York, California, Washington, Oregon, scores of US states moving to a responsible adult use because they recognise that they can reduce harm, they can reduce the cost on society and taxpayers, and that is the model that they should adopt. It is time for New South Wales to finally abandon this pointless and damaging battle and to join the lengthening list of global jurisdictions that have realised that senselessly criminalising its citizens makes no sense. At this point, Mr. President, I would like to thank a few people who have worked for so long to bring this bring me into the parliament through the Hemp Party, then the Legalise Cannabis Party, New South Wales, and Legalise Cannabis Australia, and to develop a model that we believe should get the support of so many people in the community and in this place. And Mr. President, in my discussions with members from across the political divide, I have not met one yet, not one, who has said that prohibition is a good model that is working. Not one. Members of the Liberal Party in private telling me that they want, because of their libertarian philosophy, believe that it's up to personal choice. Members of the Labor Party who recognise and have publicly advocated for ending prohibition because of the cost on the community, the cost on society, and that we are better to deal with these things through a health lens. Members of the National Party recognising that so many regional people avail themselves of cannabis because it's a working class drug. It really is. People, tradies, regional people, that is what they avail themselves of. It's a recreation and for a large part of those communities, part of the economy. But we are not talking about that model. We are talking about a homegrown model, growing 6 plants, possessing 50 grams, and being able to share that. At this point, as I say, I should thank, there are too many people to thank, but there are thousands of people across the country who want to see this reform. And I would note the contribution from Gino Vambaka from Harm Reduction Australia, who said this today at a forum earlier today, who said 900,000 Australians regularly consume cannabis. If those people came out and said to the police, I do it, charge me, convict me to the full extent of the law, imagine the impact on society. 1 million Australians, adult Australians, regularly use cannabis responsibly, reasonably, the vast majority without an impact on their mental health or physical health. Imagine if we charged those people and convicted them of 10 years jail and $10,000 fine or $10,000 fine for simply growing and possessing cannabis. It's an outdated law. It's a failed model. We all know it. I recognise the government is continuing towards its drug summit, which I welcome, and I welcome the commitment of the Premier at budget estimates to consider this reform in that context. I will be using this bill as a model in that forum, and I will also be seeking support from the House to further investigate our model through the inquiry process in due course. So that is the bill. It's time to legalise cannabis. It's time to be bold, to accept that the community understands the evidence. The evidence is clear. Prohibition has failed. Legalisation is the future. So there's a few people to thank. I'd like to thank Craig Ellis, Michael Balderstone, Gail Hester, Fiona Patton, Sue Rail, Nada Sale, Gino, Will Tregoni, Sam Kidd. I'd also like to thank William Verity and Louise Calloway, my staff, who worked on this bill and the event and have been interacting with so many patients and advocates around the state. All the great people in the Legalise Cannabis fraternity who are here, those advocates. And I would finish by thanking my darling wife, Crystal, my family, and commend the bill to the House.